How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you? I was just sitting there doom scrolling.
What
Twitter
else?
will do
What else?
that to you.
Yeah. What's new?
Oh, just same old, same old. Time changed on me while I was at work, so I ended up at work an extra hour. So that's fun.
Yeah, I know. I know. I'm up so early now.
Have an extra hour of sleep. What do you mean?
Yeah. No, I'm saying it's turned out good for
Oh,
me.
so yeah,
Yeah.
it feels like you're not supposed to be awake right now.
Right.
Looking at the time. All
All
right.
right.
So I figured we could do a fun episode. Obviously, we have our other podcast together that we do.
Yes.
And on that one, we pretty much agree on 99.999% of issues. So, but I've also seen out in the world, especially the Twitterverse, people don't seem to know how to disagree with each other. It's sad to me because we have we have a lot in common. Like I said, it's like me and you can agree on all these things about war, and then we can disagree on other things, but we can come together and move towards the movement that we agree on, and part our ways on the other movements. And I think that was losing that has really stagnated our country in a very horrendous way, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does.
So, first off, I think one thing that I don't know if we'll agree or disagree, but let's talk about how did we get here? And I'm going to kind of use the microcosm of CARES and the COVID economic reaction to kind of explain. And of course, this has happened over the wars and other things as well. But I think that progressives misunderstand economics, and thus they're being taken advantage of by wealthy individuals, if that makes any sense. So, what, far be it for me to try to give advice to my opposing viewpoints, but if you understand the way that money actually works, currency itself, right? Currency it's just a nominal factor, and inflation happens when you have too much currency chasing too few goods. Just basic, like if you're taking your Series 6 exam to become a stock trader or, become an economist, that is what the answer to that is. And deflation would be the opposite, where you have too little money chasing too much goods, right? So when you had the shutdown during COVID, you had a decrease in the amount of goods that were produced and an increase in the amount of money that was pushed into the economy with the printing and the cares and the stimulus that they put out. So what you ended up doing was create the perfect storm for inflation. Now, to use a communistic term, means of production. What is it in capitalist terms?
I give up, Daniel. What is it?
It'd be assets, right? So the means of productions is assets, right? So a factory, the land that the factory's on, these are all assets, right? These are not paper. So this is what a lot of people misunderstand in a lot of ways, is it's the assets are the means of production. So if you inflate the currency, you make the paper worth less and the stuff worth more. Who has the stuff? We talk about Elon Musk and all of these Jeff Bezos, these really hyper wealthy, rich individuals. They are not making income. Raising income tax does not touch them. You're touching, yeah, you are touching wealthy individuals, but you're talking about artists. You're talking about really dope podcasters. You're talking about dentists, researchers that are on the cutting edge of, some new development. We're talking about workers. We're not talking about the rich in the way that you think you are. If you want to go after those guys, you have to go after capital gains tax. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? All you do when you go after income and the spending and printing and income tax, all you're actually doing is playing a rich welfare game that makes them record profits. And then we're all looking around going, why are they making record profits? What's going on? I don't understand. Well, when all that stimulus money went out, they went and bought a bunch of houses, which inflated.
Yeah, so I don't disagree.
Mhm.
The issue of taxing the rich is not really a technical one. It's not a question of how you do it because the entire system is set up to protect them. So it's not that we don't know how to tax billionaires. And of course, income in the traditional sense of the word is not the main is not source of their wealth, but that's not the issue. The issue is that we have a system that's set up not to tax them. So if it was income, that income would be protected. If it's real estate, the real estate would be protected. Anything that they do would be protected because they write the laws. So it's almost what you're
Well,
saying
this
is
is
almost
why
irrelevant.
inflation's built into the system. Kind of what I'm saying. They literally say we have to have a certain percentage of inflation because the people with assets benefit from inflation.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So
like I'm telling you how they built the system. This is why I find myself on the other side. Because let me just give out a couple of straw men to make sure we're on the same page. I obviously think that everyone should have a home. I think that everyone should have food to eat and medical care and everything. And like I'm not opposed to any of that. I just think there are better ways to get there. So
better ways than what?
that's where my position is. It has nothing to do with, any selfishness or
Well, what are you attacking when you say better ways? What
what
are
I would
those better
say
ways?
is the reason why the rich want to like this is the point that I've made so many times is the government is moving trillions of dollars a year. Elon Musk couldn't do that if he wanted to, but he can throw a lot of money at Donald Trump and then move that kind of money. The reason why our system is in the pickle that it's in. I mean, you can go back to Bastiat, is because there's so much there's so much to be captured. It's a smart investment. You've made the government a smart investment.
All
It's
right.
smarter to
If we're
invest in the government than it
if
is
we're gonna
in the market.
argue, if we're gonna argue, then we need to understand what we're arguing about. Like I'm not sure. I'm not trying to understand this discussion. Honestly, what are we even talking about? Yeah, what are we arguing about? How do we yeah, yeah, right. The problem isn't any of this. The problem is, and I think we agree. That's why I'm wondering what we're arguing about. The problem is that the game is rigged. So whatever the criteria for guaranteeing the advantage of certain classes is, that is what will happen. And the laws will change as the economy changes in order to make sure that that happens. There's no point in chasing after their money and arguing over exactly how to tax it right now because they'll just find loopholes. If you manage to somehow pass something against the interests of the 1%, they will just find a different loophole because they run the system. You have to remove their money from politics as much as you can, at least. The
That's what I've said before. Is it's like it's one of those things that it's a self-perpetuating. The old Smedley Butler quote: "The self-licking ice cream cone." You have a situation where you really kind of have to dismantle the incentives before you could actually solve it. So this is kind of the point that I make. As I've told you before, I identify as an anarchist, but more specifically, I'm a panarchist, which is a kind of a complicated point, but it's basically I believe that if we're truly anarchists, everyone isn't going to organize in the same way. Like you're going to have capitalists, you're going to have communists, you're going to have, as long as people are free to do what they want to do, everyone's not going to do the same thing. It's about coexistence within knowing that. But so for me, I would make an argument. Kropotkin is I don't know how familiar you are with communist theory, but Kropotkin and Bakunin are amazing thinkers. The anarcho communists and anarcho syndicalists who have some of the most amazing thoughts. And one of Bakunin, he was a contemporary with Marx, and he pointed out to Marx, he was saying, if you have a dictatorship of the proletariat, if you have the working class overthrow ruling class, they then become the ruling class. and thus their interests cease to be aligned with the workers because they're no longer workers. It's the power is what's corrupting people. So it's like what his point was this: you cannot approach a classless system while there is a government. Period. It's impossible to do because the system is just going to self-perpetuate itself. Kind of what you're saying. This is something that Bakunin really heavily pointed out. So, like I said, economics is my hard nerd thing. Like I can tell you about, communistic, capitalistic, anybody.
Yeah, so I came from the study of politics, not of economics, and to me, economics is politics. Harold Lasswell defined politics as the question of who gets what, when, and where, and that's the ultimate political question. The ultimate political question is an economic one. And the ultimate economic question is a political one. And what the rules of economics are, what operate within the sphere of what politics allow it to be, or how politics emerge in that country. And I think that realization is what's taking me away from capitalism. I used to be a very dyed in the wool capitalist. This may surprise some people, and I still believe in capitalism to some extent. But I've seen the main flaw in capitalism is not an economic one. It does work on an economic level. It's a political one. It's the that ultimately, when you have people with enough money, they will destroy everything that's good, not only about politics, but also everything that's good about economics. Adam Smith did predict that. He said that as soon as you have a
Adam
bunch of
Smith was a crackpot.
well, his, his, his best his best observation. He had several great observations. I'm actually a fan of Adam Smith. But his best observation was saying that if you put company owners in the same sector in the same room, they will come up with a plot to raise prices and lower services to everyone within 5 minutes. That's the flaw. The main flaw within the internal logic of capitalism is that capitalists destroy capitalism. They don't want, once they have enough money, once they have enough clout, they don't want any competition. And once they have enough money and enough political influence, they will destroy all competition. So the good thing about capitalism, the positive impetus that it has, which I still believe in, is competition. And that ultimately the competitors try to destroy the competition. And that's what we're seeing now in America. We're seeing that in every sector the level of competition is going down, and that stops social mobility, and it also means that our prices are going up. That's inflation, and it is built into the system, right? Because once you have monopolies or cartels, they raise the prices, and that's what they're trying to do, and that's what they're writing laws in order to do. So you're right. It is built into the system. But for me,
Right. This is
yeah,
Go
for me, there's no alternative to capitalism, in the sense that you can't not have incentives for people to succeed and to innovate. But the government, and this is where we differ. You're talking about anarchy. The government needs to be the one that protects competition, and that's where you need to remove money from government. No one else is going to be able to do it. Anarchy, unfortunately, create a system quite similar to what we're seeing now, which is that the strong will create their own forms of government that benefit them. That's the concern. That's the natural state of nature. The natural state of nature is that the strong use their strength to get stronger and to trample on the weak. And someone needs to prevent that from happening.
Okay, so like what I like to use is an example that a lot of the people on the opposite side like to use because I think it's a beautiful example for my side, not the other. A gentleman known as John D. Rockefeller once really heavily tried to monopolize a company, Standard Oil. He was trying to monopolize the oil industry. Specifically at this time, it was kerosene more than it was gasoline or anything. And it was more about heating homes. So I think that's partially relevant to the point here. John D. Rockefeller tried like hell for several years, wrote letters to several of his friends to monopolize oil. He continuously drove down the price of oil whenever you have a competitor. If you go and you look at the charts, the price of oil was dropping 5 times the rate of deflation. So if you do the calculations, we can tell who is actually winning from this. It was the consumer. And every single time he would knock all of his competitors out of the market, he would drive the price up, right? Because that's the plan. The thing about that is there were other capitalists in the market that would look over and go, "Hey, there's a lot of money to be made in oil." And they would jump right in there and he'd be fighting somebody else again until he made friends with a gentleman I know you like, but I don't, FDR. And then they came up with this idea called antitrust legislation. He split Standard Oil into several companies, which he also controlled, and maintained a monopoly through several companies instead of just the one. Antitrust has, to this day, been nothing but a shakedown from the federal government. Microsoft was brought up on antitrust legislation at the time, was spending not a dime, not one red cent on lobbying. Afterward, they started lobbying all these congressmen, and then antitrust suits disappeared. It's a shakedown. All it is. You're making a whole lot of money there. Government needs some.
Look, you're not wrong in how these things turn out. You're not. The American government is not really a government. It's a business. It's owned by big business in order to benefit big business. And this ties into
Like,
the,
I mean, I don't even believe in patent law because I believe it monopolizes industry. I believe
you don't
that
believe in
we
what?
really need competition. Won't believe in patents.
You don't believe in patents.
I don't
I've
believe in
never
any intellectual property outside of a trademark. To me, a trademark is a signature that's different. I said I did this, that's different, but because otherwise it'd be fraud. But anything else, no.
I think we need to protect and encourage innovation. And I think that American protection of intellectual property law is probably one of the main reasons that America's been so innovative over the years.
Let me
But
be let
again,
me be a commie here and say that necessity is the mother of invention, not profit. Profit is the
yeah,
mother of fad.
but that's the thing. A lot of the inventions are necessity in the sense that they help the inventor make ends meet. A lot of the inventions, especially in fields like health and so on and so forth, aren't because you're solving your own problem. They're because you're solving someone else's problem for profit. I mean, I don't think empirically speaking, I don't think most people invent patents because it's a problem in their life. That's a very, Neolithic way of looking at invention. I need fire, I invent fire.
No, 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 no,
That's
no.
not
I
how it
don't. I
works
wouldn't
anymore.
necessarily say that. Especially in the current system. I mean, when what is it, like 70 or 80% of that medical research is paid for by the US government itself, and then you get to have a patent where you get to make, you know, insane profits. The pharmaceutical industry is one of the craziest.
I think we need to separate one problem you have with your
That's
thinking
just a
in my
tangent.
one problem you have with your thinking, in my opinion, if I can get a little critical of you here, is that you tend to equate a concept with the way it's used by the US government. And I think that's a mistake because the US government is a very specific form of corruption. It's a very specific form of corruption. There's corruption everywhere in the world, but America has its own completely unique almost form of corruption where the richest members of society run every single element of the country from top to bottom according to their agenda based on their ability to buy politicians. Every country in the world has an element of that, to be sure, but in America, it's wild. I don't think there's any other country that has anywhere near that system of just free for all among the richest. And anything they touch turns to shit. And that doesn't mean that every single measure they touch is inherently like that, you know? Because there's so many countries in the world that operate differently. In some cases worse, in some cases better. America's not the worst system in the world, not by a long shot, but it has a very specific rot. You know, it's horrible in a very specific way. And there's really no government service the US touches that isn't corrupted by money in one way or another. Nothing. There's nothing they touch that isn't corrupted that way. That doesn't mean that every single measure that they use is inherently bad, because they use every fucking measure that exists. And some of those measures are great and could be great. And some of those measures are awful. And you take patent and you take all these things and you look at how America uses them, and you say, this is the only way it could be used. That's not true. Patents serve a very important purpose. You know, welfare payments can serve a very important purpose. All sorts of things that America does in horrible ways. Antitrust laws can serve a very constructive purpose. And you don't even have to go far. Just go across the pond to the EU. Look at their antitrust laws. Look at how they enforce antitrust laws in practice, and you'll see that while not perfect, they benefit the EU citizen a lot more than antitrust laws in America do. In America, they seem very arbitrary, and they end up benefiting the same people everything benefits. And in the EU, the lobbying system, or in Canada, the lobbying system is set up differently, and very often, not always, antitrust laws benefit the regular citizen or benefit competition. These are tools that can be used in a positive way. It's like a hammer, you know, you can use a hammer to bash someone's head in, or you can use a hammer to build something. And you shouldn't say, well, hammers are bad if someone bashed your head in, because in most cases, a hammer is used to build something, right? So be very careful when you look at the American use of these tools as the be all end all. Like I said, America is sick in a very specific way.
Right, but I'm making a point though specifically on when it comes to patents. I was just making a point on that it makes it even more egregious. But I'm saying in
In
patents in
America,
general,
yeah.
by default, definitionally, are a monopoly. You're handing a monopoly on this given idea to this person because you're saying it's because you came up with it first, but you are handing a monopoly. And the thing about this is to use medical patents. A lot of people make this point attacking pharmaceutical companies, saying it's like, why would you sell the cure if you can sell the treatment? You can make so much more money over the long term off the treatment than you can off the cure. Well, the reason why is because somebody else is selling the cure. But if you have the patent on the cure, they can't. You see what I'm saying? And if you're making a drug and someone else can make it better, then they should be the one making it. The point of the matter is what are we trying to do? Are we trying to make money for drug makers, or are we trying to make sure that the drugs get out to the people? And the point of the matter is if you're the first guy to come up with a way to make a chair, but somebody else can make it better, then that guy should be the guy making chairs. Doesn't matter that you're the first guy that did it. I don't think we should just be handing out monopolies. I think that's a very crazy way to run a society if you want, you know, any kind of price decrease on things as time goes on.
That's not an argument against patents. That's an argument for the specific policies of patents. Because I think you need to. I've never really thought about this, so you're much more of an expert than me. I haven't honestly never.
But I do think you should always give credit, man. People come up with something, they should have their name written down in a history book. I think that the way that we do it now honestly really destroys that, where it's like
But
Merrick came up with this. Merrick didn't come up with nothing. Some guy named John, you know, Oppenheimer at Merrick came up with this. You know
let,
what I mean?
let's break this down for a second. So patents exist in order to encourage innovation, and you sort of need a balance between encouraging innovation and encouraging its development in the highest quality way. And what patents encourage is the ability to compensate the person who came up with it. You're saying he has a monopoly, but there's of course there's an amount of time that they hold that monopoly, and they also have the rights to sell those rights to someone else. So there is already an attempt to ameliorate that harmful monopoly once you have one. Now you can say, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree, that it breaks too hard in favor of the person who came up with the idea. But to not protect the innovation at all would simply discourage innovation. There's so many people out there tinkering with ideas because they want to make some money, and I think that they would be doing less of that if there was no protection. And if there's one thing that you have to look at the results and say America did well, maybe not right now, but throughout most of its history, it's innovation. America has been a really innovative society. Whatever criticism I have of this country, and I have plenty, the good side of America is how much it's innovated. It's been incredible. This country has, with not that many people relatively to the biggest countries in the world. I look at it compared to China, which stifled innovation for generations. Now it's doing a lot better. And versus America, the system, and patents are a major part of it, has worked in terms of encouraging innovation. I wouldn't throw it out so quickly. I would adjust it,
I
not
would
throw it.
argue here's a question I would ask though. If we're looking at the past, say, 25 years, where would you say the majority of innovation has happened?
Plenty of it's been in the U.S. I don't know.
No, I wouldn't even say where, in as in like the place. I would say it's tech, and
Yeah,
especially the internet, which is the least copyright regulated part of the internet. Like if we were to use the same copyright laws that you see in medical patents with the internet, we would not have X. We would be on Friendster right now, and you see what I'm saying? Like
you
MySpace
make
would have
that
never
sound like a
came,
bad
Facebook
thing.
would have never came.
Society would be a lot better, I think, if we were still on Friendster and not on X. You're defeating your own argument, honestly. No, but I get what you're saying. But considering that there is intellectual copyright law on the internet, just not as
Correct,
robust,
but
you're
the
more
reason
yeah, go ahead.
the reason it just to tell you a little sneak cheat here, intellectual property law has a little bit of a funny workaround, which is that, if you get, I think it's 20 or so percent different, then it's legal. And it's a lot easier to do that with code and make something basically the same thing, if that makes sense, than it is to do with, anything else. So it's like you can take a piece of code and you can play with it for, 2 hours and have it 20% different.
That's kind of what I'm saying, is that what you have here, I'm generally speaking, especially on economy matters, I'm
But it's
not
loose. It ends up being looser than if we're talking about a four-legged chair than a three-legged chair or something like that. It ends up being a lot looser when we're working with code than it does with something else.
but you're not arguing with what I'm saying. You're kind of agreeing with what I'm saying. I think patents are important as part of a balance to protect innovation. If patents are too strong, if monopolies are too strong, that stifles innovation. And if monopolies are too weak, that stifles innovation. For opposite reasons, for different reasons. And in order to advance innovation, you need a balance. You need a pragmatic balance between protecting the person who came up with the idea and protecting the people who want to take that idea to other places, right? A balance. Look at both their interests for the greater good. And if tech has a different balance that works, that's great. You don't need the same balance in every sector. What you need is pragmatism. What matters in this is what works. There's no point in having ideology here. Ideology, look, we see this so much right now in American politics. When you take ideology too far, you can't solve problems. Everything becomes like, every immigrant needs to go in or every immigrant needs to be deported. And no one can agree to either one of those things. And then there's just arguments. And meanwhile, the immigration system stagnates and everything gets worse and worse while you can't agree on a solution, right? The important part is to balance and have some pragmatism. Um, and I think patent rights is a good example of that. If you went extreme and canceled them completely, I think it would stifle innovation. And
We
again, I
can
haven't studied
disagree.
this. This is just my input.
We found one we disagree on. Here's one, but I think maybe not so much of a disagreement. I know you've took a little heat on X for sharing a Candace Owen tweet. How dare you?
Well, so first of all, full disclosure, I have a weird relationship with Candace Owens.
Really?
Little bit. Candace Owens is someone who I always considered an anti-Semite, a liberal Zionist, standard liberal Zionist until not long ago. And then let's see, that was in June 2024. The story about Israeli torture in Sdet Man broke. I didn't break the story, but I did talk to some people in the camp. This is one of the reasons I ended up being leaving Zionism is because of the aftershock of this. So I talked to two people in the camp. They confirmed not only that there was torture, but that there was murder in Sdet Teiman, or at least manslaughter. And I published that. I published their testimony. I don't know if you were following me at the time. This is over a year ago. And Candace Owens saw my tweet. A lot of people saw my tweet and talked about it on her show about how brave I am and blah 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 blah. Mispronounced my name, but everyone does. And then she also followed me on Twitter. Now, if you go to Candace Owens' account, she follows very few people. I don't know how many, but not many. I'm one of them for whatever reason.
Look how special.
And she'll occasionally DM me. So I
We gotta
admire
get on the
and
Candace Owens show.
right. She hasn't invited me on the show. People said, "Oh, when are you going on the show?" Well, when she invites me. I have very mixed feelings about Candace Owens. I think she's absolutely brilliant. Some of the speeches she's given um, on Israel and on money and politics and all sorts of things are some of the best I've seen anyone give. Like I know why she has such a high following. On the other hand, she goes completely insane sometimes. Like the whole thing with
Yeah, I
the
think she
whole
goes
thing
over her skis a little bit sometimes for sure.
the whole thing with people being men, like transgender, and people being gay is completely insane. You know, she takes a woman who, women who have had children and women who have pictures of them and birth certificates from their whole lives and says that they're transgender. Why? Why would anyone do that? She has conspiracy theories about Jews that make absolutely no sense. She likes to blame every atrocity committed by Zionists on Jews. She has all these conspiracy theories about Frankish Jews and just things that someone who knows Jewish history, we all know that they're just completely false. And then one of the things about her, and this may just be me, she always seems so convinced in what she's saying. Well, a lot of these people, I look at them and I'm like, they're full of it. I don't believe Tucker Carlson, for example, for a second that he believes. I mean, he believes some of what he says, but when he goes on certain tangents, I'm like, you're lying. You know, you're the son of a diplomat. You used to say completely different things. You're full of it. And I see Candace Owens, and I'm like, okay, well, she's always gone on crazy rants. That's what she's always done. The targets have changed. And she has this look in her eye where it seems like she's just 100% convinced in what she's saying. I believe her, not in the sense that what she's saying is true, because most of it's not, except for when she says, I'm great. That's true. But most of it's not true. But it's true in the sense that I think she believes it. I think she's a true believer, at least in most of what she says. I find her to be a fascinating woman. She's also gorgeous. I'm just going to say it. She's gorgeous. So I find her to be a fascinating
Don't
woman.
disagree.
Sorry?
Oh, I was saying I don't disagree.
No, no one does. No, yeah, like I'll tell you a little secret, not a secret. But when I appeared on her show, not me personally, when she started talking about me on her show, a bunch of people started texting me. Oh my God, Candace Owens likes you. You should go for her. You should go for it. I'm not talking about one guy. I'm not talking about two guys. I'm not talking about three guys. I'm talking about at least 20 guys who, in one way or another, told me go
I
for it.
can
Go for it. I'm
fix
like,
her.
listen, she's married with. I think at that point she had one child less,
Yeah,
but
she's already got a kid and everything, and
I
like I
think she
said,
has
from what
3,
I
doesn't she?
like I
Back then she
said,
only had 1 or 2.
it's one
Yeah.
of those situations I can tell from what I've seen. I'm not a hardcore follower of her show. Every now and again, she'll have
I've
somebody
never
on, and
watched
I'll be
an
like,
entire
"Ooh, I gotta
episode.
see this." But, I think she had Dave Smith on quite a few times, so I watch anything that has Dave Smith in it. But, watch a few, but you can tell by the way that she talks about her kids and family that she really loves her kids and family, and I don't know, as a dad, like, there's something about that I just have an utmost respect for, is somebody who you can tell is actually legitimately dedicated to their family. It's something that's a big deal to me. But what I would argue is there's something that I think that we have to be mindful, especially us right now, anti-war people in general, is that there is a language breakdown that has happened over the last, honestly, 20 years. We don't agree on what the word racist means. We don't agree on, like, we use different terms to describe the same thing. You know what I'm saying? I watched the Tucker Nick Fuentes interview, for example, right? If you listen to what Nick Fuentes is saying specifically, at least in this interview, I don't know a whole lot about this man. I'm saying in this interview specifically, it doesn't sound very different from what Norman Finkelstein is saying about Jewish power complexes. It's just said in different language, if that makes sense. And so, like I said, because it's said in a different language, it comes off a lot more harsh than I think he's intending it to be. I think
Well,
that we have to be very careful, right? I'm not saying let's go align with Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson and all these hard right wingers and let's go join MAGA. What I'm saying is we have to be careful with basically doing the what would I say? Dave Smith would say doing the CIA bidding, but I would say doing the Mossad's bidding in this case. You know, like we can't let the anti-war movement get fractured because we know that the playbook, especially right now, is calling everyone a racist. And I know Nick Fuentes is the easiest target, so I wouldn't doubt if he's kind of in that. Like I said, he's kind of the Hamas figure. It's like let's put him in and then say, look, see, these guys are all anti-Semites. If that makes any
yeah.
sense.
So I'm glad we're having this conversation because it's something that myself am struggling with right now. Let's. I just Googled while you were saying what are the worst Fuentes quotes. So let's just say a few of them. Okay, 6 million. I'm not buying it. Jews have no place in Western civilization because they're not Christian. I love you and I love Hitler. Our civilization is being dismantled. Our people are being genocided. Jim Crow was better for them and it's better for us. All I want is total Aryan victory. What can you and I do about legislators besides kill them? So on and so forth, right? So he
Right.
has a
And not disagreeing with what you're saying there.
no,
So
not
what
even.
I'm kind of
I
getting
haven't even
at.
finished my yeah. I haven't even finished my point. It's like
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
on the one hand, I feel that we're in a war against very dark forces, and those dark forces are corporations, governments that commit genocide, that are all these things hand in hand. And it's very important to have wide alliances. And I think that's what you're getting at. And I agree with you. And that's what I've been practicing. And I've received a lot of criticism for that attitude. And it's something that it took me a long time to get to that point. But then how far do you stretch that coalition? Do you stretch that coalition to include people that in many ways are actually worse people than a lot of the people that we're fighting? You know, like I don't think Nick Fuentes is a better person than Benjamin Netanyahu in any way. The only argument you could make is that, you know, Fuentes might be useful, right, in countering Netanyahu. But once you use people who are so, you know, far gone in your coalition, what moral standing do you have, right? And then but then on the other hand, once you start disqualifying people, that's exactly what the enemy wants. The enemy wants to divide and conquer, right? So we really have a pickle here. I
Exactly.
mean, we have awful people in our coalition, truly awful
I think
people.
there's something to recognize too with Nick Fuentes. Again, 80% of what I know about Nick Fuentes is literally from this Tucker Carlson interview. But like I said, that's because from both the left and the right, everyone has told me, I don't worry about him. And now that makes me wonder, you know what I mean? Because now, because I have trust issues at this point, you know what I mean? So I haven't done my diving. So I'm not,
Do
I
some
don't know what the
diving into
tone is.
Fuentes. Do some diving into
Yeah,
Fuentes
I don't
because
know what
you,
the tone is of what he was
yeah.
saying. I do know 2 factors that I think are incredibly important factors to think about. One of them is something that you yourself went through. But he was a lot younger when he went through it. You know what I mean? Like this man was a rising star in the conservative movement, was like about to be like Ben Shapiro's protege, and then all of a sudden everyone's trying to cancel him. Everyone hates him. He's blacklisted. And not because, like I said, the original question wasn't, the Jews. It was literally, what's up with Israel? And you're not allowed to ask that question. You see what I'm saying? And so he starts getting blacklisted, and that sends him down a rabbit hole that I think he's a little bit more receptive to the dark side of because these people just wronged him and it's not part of his identity. You know what I'm
You're talking
saying?
about
So
Fuentes
I think
now?
there's something about that, and I also think there's something about the Xbox Live troll culture, if that makes sense. He knew this is the thing that would piss those people off, so he said the thing that would piss those people off, if that makes any sense. Again, I don't think that's right. I think that that kind of me and you have talked about this before, is it's like, you know, that kind of stuff is poisonous in general. It discredits you. It's not good. But I'm just kind of saying, like, there is a level of understanding there that I don't think we should just completely shoot past. And if his thing is look, I have an issue with, you know, the Larry Finks of the world, but I don't have an issue with the Shaiels of the world. I don't have an issue with the, you know, he obviously doesn't have an issue with the Dave Smiths of the world. So it's like, what is, you know, the actual issue? If we get into specifics and we agree, then what are we doing here? You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I'm saying is the purity tests have really destroyed any hope of progress for the past at least, you know, at least 16 years.
This is a I think we're hitting here in this conversation on a problem so deep and so profound that I think may even be insoluble, honestly, and is one of the reasons a lot of what we're doing, trying to fight against this evil machine that we're all seeing run the world, is probably going to fail, or has a very good chance of failing, is exactly this problem where, on the one hand, the enemy is trying to divide us. And on the other hand, if we don't have any standards at all, the movement will be completely tarnished. And where do you draw that line, right? I think it's easy to draw a line, and Nick Fuentes is out of it. It's easy to draw that line. But who else is out of it, right? There's a lot
Where is
of,
Candace Owens? That's the question.
yeah, where's Candace Owens, right? Where's Kim
Where's
Iverson?
Tucker Carlson?
Where's Tucker Carlson? Where's Marjorie Taylor Greene? They all have very questionable things that they've said, and the line is a few inches here, a few inches there. And once you start drawing that line, where do you put it? If you put it too far,
Good
you're
example
in a
here.
coalition. If you
Dave
put it too
Smith,
close,
actually, I want
yeah.
to say this is before any of that other stuff. I want to say Dave Smith had Nick Fuentes on, and they were talking about curing autism. And Nick Fuentes joked that would be a holocaust for conservatives.
If what? Sorry, say that
And
again. I missed it.
he said that they said something about curing autism, and he said that would be a holocaust for conservatives. And Dave Smith joked back, you know what I'm saying? Except this one really happened, and everybody got mad at him for that. And I'm like, first of all, it was a joke told to a comedian who joked back, knowing that he had this guy that supposedly, you know what I mean? Like in the reference, that's a joke. Dave Smith is a Jew who's the grandson of a Holocaust survivor. You know what I mean? So it's just like it's not, it was never meant that way, but people will play these dumb little self-hating Jew games or not really a Jew games. It's just so, in my opinion, disgusting when we can't just take things in their context. Because if I was to, that's why I say it's like you know, you can Google a bunch of quotes, and I guarantee you, if you Google worst things Dave Smith ever said, you'll find a lot of horrible stuff. Why? Because he's a comedian that does offensive comedy.
Let's
You know
see.
what I mean?
Let's see if the worst thing Dave Smith. First of all, Dave Smith is a comedian, and Fuentes is not, and that's important.
Correct, but he is
That's
he is a
important.
troll. You see what I'm saying? Like he has always played that role as I am a edgelord troll.
I don't think you're gonna find Nazi things that I've never heard. I'm no expert on Dave Smith. I'm actually Googling worst
I
things
am.
Dave Smith did, and nothing's coming
I
up.
am.
Okay, most offensive
They don't
things.
know enough.
Most offensive things Dave Smith said. Let's see.
They're gonna have some milk toast stuff because they're not fans like me.
Go find them. Let's see. He said, "Find a gay person in your neighborhood and rough them up a little bit." Okay. He said, "Israel is inflicting the worst level of human suffering on children by choice." I agree.
Super racist and offensive.
Hiroshima was a war crime, plain and simple, and a flex on the Soviets. Kanye
I like
West.
that it's just like it's going to stuff that there's no issue with.
This is what Google's showing me. For every really great song, Kanye should get one slur that he's allowed. Don't agree, but okay.
Obviously a joke. Like you read that in print and you're like, this is a joke.
Yeah, so I don't know. If you can find something that's as bad as what Fuentes said, show it to me. I'm not seeing that. I've always found I don't know. I'm not a big fan of his. I don't know him very well. I usually find the stuff that he says to be quite obvious very often, and that of course his understanding of the Middle East as someone with no ties to it or education in it, as far as I can tell, his knowledge in the Middle East is not very deep, not lacking completely. There's certainly people who talk about the Middle East who know less, but not very deep either. And so I'm not particularly impressed by him, but I've never been offended by him either. He's perfectly he for me, as far as I know, he's a perfectly welcome part of the anti-war tent. Candace Owens, is very useful, I think, but also very problematic. And Fuentes is, I think, just a liability. But like I said, I
Candace, you can come
struggle
on my show.
I struggle deeply with the question of where to put the line because I know very well that the enemy wants to create as many lines as possible, wants to see us as divided as possible. And it's a weapon that they use, and I don't want to cooperate with that. But on the other hand, it's also good for them if we have no lines at all. If we accept every single piece of shit, every Nazi piece of shit, that's great for them to tarnish
Yeah.
all of us. Because then,
Obviously, I would assume that, O9A and Adam Wathan are against Israel, but they can stay in their corner.
I don't
I
even know
don't
who
know
those
if you know
people
who.
are. No.
Oh, these are not Proud Boys. These are Nazis.
Okay.
These are like swastikas. I will call and swat a church or swat a synagogue. I mean, like Nazis. Like I will show up with a gun and start shooting people. Nazis.
Yeah, I think someone like Fuentes also, I think that what Fuentes is doing, also not on a level of his opinions, but on a tactical political level, is trying a takeover of MAGA in a way that I think the ambitions of this movement are to become part of the machine, rather than subvert it. And I think the heritage kerfuffle is very instructive in that. What we're seeing is movement and Vance, allowing comments and so on and so forth. What we're seeing is a movement towards the genocidal corporate elite of this movement. Their ambition is not to be on the fringe. Their ambition is to bring Nazism into that space, into the enemy's center of gravity. And that would just take the existing machine and make it worse. And I very much distrust that Groyper approach to politics for that reason, as well as the outright Nazism. They're not trying to fight the establishment. They're trying to become the establishment, just like Hitler was in 1933. Very similar. Riding on conservatives who are weak and unwilling to fight back to bring Nazism into the nerve center of decision making. I see that pattern, and they're doing it. Those are the kind of people who want to keep Jews out of the anti-government coalition as well. There's a lot of problems here, and there's no easy solutions, and that's why I
All our best
say,
thinkers.
sorry.
So that's all our best thinkers.
I know, yeah,
It's like 90% Jews.
especially me. Especially me and Candace Owen. Yeah, I mean the trouble is the anti-war movement has its fair share, to put it mildly, racists as well, not just anti-Semitism, and that's self-defeating for the movement. The best way this works to oppose what's happening in America and happening all over the world is to have as wide a coalition as possible, right? And yet, racism guarantees you're not going to have a wide coalition because racism immediately alienates all these different groups. So what we have here is an oxymoron, or we have a paradox is the right word. We have a paradox of wide coalition that can't be wide because racism will keep it divided. And I think honestly, that's not a soluble problem. We have it's like a cancer, and I don't know what to do about it. So I'm glad you brought it up. I don't
Yeah,
have any
I
answer.
hear you. It's just something
Yeah.
that we gotta we I think we really do have to figure out, especially because, like I said, they're not hesitating on their end to align right up with the Islamophobia and trot it right out and just be like, like it's up to the worst stuff and just go, well, yeah, no, well, that's just Smotrich. He's just that one guy, or that's just Randy Fine. He's just one guy, or you know what I mean? There's no issue at all to go. And like I said, it's like if we're comparing, Nick Fuentes, like I said, current day saying, I'm not talking about all Jews. I'm talking about like these really powerful guys that are, that feel like their culture is intertwined with the state of Israel and that they really have to defend Israel. I'm not talking about everybody. And Randy Fine, who's literally, no, I mean all Gazans, kill them all.
All
You know
Muslims.
what I mean? Like
Fine will say all Muslims, even beyond all Gazans.
that is
Laura
the
Loomer.
biggest agreement I have with Dave Smith is, like I said, obviously racism is a big deal to me. I'm heavily against it. I have, half black children that I have to raise in this world, so I definitely don't want to see that you know prevalent. But what I will also make a huge point that I think it is a weird thing that we have this hierarchy of outrage, like what is outrageous, and that we've placed racism at the top. Genocide is worse. You know what I mean? Like there's when we have Madeleine Albright saying, to the press that she thinks the price of 1 million Iraqi children is worth it to put pressure on Saddam Hussein, and that's not cancel worthy. But somebody saying the blacks is. I feel like we failed somewhere. And I'm not even necessarily saying that that doesn't mean that, both can't be it, but we can't, does that make any sense what I'm saying here?
It does and it doesn't. So you're absolutely right about what you said about Madeleine Albright. And I think the reason we see racism as so offensive to begin with is in order to prevent things like what Madeleine Albright said, right? Why do we hate racism so much? Racism didn't used to be a big deal. Racism was very common. It wasn't something we talked about. Some things happened in history that made us think, okay, racism has to be fought at all costs, right? In America, obviously, slavery, Jim Crow, the Holocaust, etc. We had these results, these atrocities that came as a result of racism. And we all decided we need to band out against racism. What's happened in the meantime is that we've focused a lot on kind of microaggressions or racism that maybe isn't that harmful, even though it's offensive. And meanwhile, allowed some of the atrocities that occur as a result of racism to be permissible, right? So we've sort of divorced the two. But the solution is not to allow racism, because without
And
racism,
I wasn't even
I'm not
arguing that,
no,
obviously.
I know what you're arguing. I know what you're arguing. I'm trying to find point what you were saying rather than counter it. Think about
Yeah.
what Madeleine Albright said. That is a deeply racist statement, right? Deeply racist. She would never say it's worth it to kill 1 million Americans to pressure Trump into changing his policy, right? She would never say that. She'd never say it's worth killing 1 million Israelis to pressure Netanyahu into changing his policy. But she would say that about Arabs. It is permissible to say that about Arabs. Controversial, maybe, but not career ending, right? And that's out of racism. That's just purely out of racism. And what we need to do is keep in mind the reason we're against racism is not because we're worried about Halloween costumes, but because we're worried about genocide, because we're worried about slavery, because we're worried about real atrocities. So I wouldn't say the solution is to not worry about racism, but it's to worry about the kind of racism that gets people killed, the kind of racism that involves violence, right? And so the most important racism we're seeing in America today, probably more than anything else, is what ICE is doing. Because what ICE is doing is violent, it involves atrocities, and it will lead to greater atrocities if it's not ended. But without tackling racism, um, we can't prevent that from happening. Why is it happening? It's happening because we don't treat Latinos in this country as if they're fully human. And so you have to look at racism as an evil. And I think this is an important point. It doesn't matter so much what your uncle is thinking when he's watching TV and drinking a beer. That's not necessarily the most important part. The important part is when it becomes government policy. That's the most important part. And when it becomes popular in society, because that often leads to government policy. And that's what we need to be careful of. And it's the lethal manifestations of racism that are the most important. What matters the most is what gets people killed. Just yesterday, this Zionist shill, Aviva Klompas, she posted, universities have to be defunded because they're not protecting Jewish students. And I wrote, how many Jewish students were killed and injured that is such a problem that we need to defund universities? And a lot of people are like, how would you say that? Would you ever say that about Black people? Would you ever say it about Latino people? And like, yes, 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 I would. The most important manifestations of racism are the ones that involve violence. You're not going to be able to take racism out of people's hearts. And you're not going to be able, or nor should you, honestly, stop people from making racist jokes. What you can do, and is worth doing, is preventing them from killing people, preventing them from, passing laws that discriminate. Those are the important things. And so I think that we need to focus on the most egregious outcomes of racism rather than its micro manifestations. We've wasted a lot of time on these micro manifestations. Meanwhile, genocide and crackdowns on immigration and deportations and all that continues and only gets worse.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at is I
I know,
think
that's why
I
I
think
want to
there's
continue
a
that. Yeah.
huge problem with the yeah, yeah. I think there's a huge problem with missing the endpoints. It's kind of the thing that I think me and you on our first podcast ever, well, I pointed out that the Holocaust wasn't wrong because it happened to Jews. It was wrong because it happened to people, and slavery wasn't wrong because it happened to blacks. It was wrong because it happened to people. You know what I mean? So like to me, I think that like if we lose the truth, you know what I mean, which is that it's the actual endpoint, you know what I mean? The deaths under Stalin or Mao are also relevant because they're deaths, even if they were all Chinese people under Mao and he's Chinese, it doesn't make them matter less. You know what I mean? And so I think that there's something to like playing this game where it's like I do agree that this is a high motivator in a lot of cases for some of the greatest atrocities that mankind has seen. I mean, obviously Hitler is a glaring example of this, but my point is more that like we have to focus on the end point being the problem rather than the thought crime, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I totally agree. The reason racism is a problem is because it's highly associated with horrific crimes. Not all horrific crimes are associated with racism. And the most important thing is to protect human lives. So, yeah,
Right.
I agree. We've become hyper focused on racism for cultural reasons, political reasons, idiocy. I don't know. You could write books about it, and we've neglected the outcomes. I totally agree with you, and also the focus on micro elements of racism has been so destructive and has made people not take racism seriously as a problem and has made racism worse. I see it in with my people with the focus on the desperate attempt to turn any criticism of Israel into anti-Semitism has made so many people say anti-Semitism is not a real thing, you just made it up because it seems like you're constantly making
Or
it
like
up.
I said, it's like I'm not again, as I've told you, I haven't looked into Nick Fuentes, but now I'm just over here like I need to go see what this man has to say because everybody told me he's racist, and I know what that means. It
Right,
means he could
exactly.
have something to say.
Exactly. So not only is it not preventing racism, but it's causing racism. Because it used to be that race, you would say, "Oh, someone's been lynched. That's racist. There's someone's being enslaved. That's racist." Now it's like you said something that could be interpreted as recalling some trope. Therefore, you're racist, and everyone's rolling their eyes, and no one cares anymore. And it's been a really self-defeating. And of course, racists have used that to their advantage. They enjoy that. They like it. The whole anti-woke movement is that. It's like, you've been so idiotic about racism, and now we're just going to promote out and out racism. You overplayed your hand. And of course, a lot of the people who
Yep. To attack the left is the power of the left. The left had always been in charge my entire life. And the power of the left, the reason that they had control over the culture was incrementalism. They understood that you just got to inch by inch by inch by inch by inch. They understood this with gay marriage. They raised hell, but slowly, inch by inch by inch by inch until you got it. And then all of a sudden it was just like this. And then everybody was like, no, no, we're not doing all of that. And I think that's kind of really what happened is it was way too much all at once that, Newton's law applies to politics as well. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. There will always be a pendulum swing back from what you do. And the harder you push, the harder that swing comes back.
yeah.
I was always really scared, especially with the way that they were doing the whole trans thing. And it was like, yeah, you're going after people's kids now. Like, I'm not saying that, like, medical decisions and stuff like that, but like when it was, we're going to start teaching this in schools, I was like, yee, you can't go that far that quick with conservatives. They are going to freak out. You know what I mean? They are going to freak out. Like if you go and you go back 20 years, it's like were they so up in arms about gays? They were like, you're gonna push this on our kids. You know what I mean? And it was just kind of to them that was validation.
Yeah. But there's no control anymore over the narrative. It's not like, you don't have gatekeepers anymore. So you have a lot of people trying to get attention all the time, and they're pushing further and further on the trans thing. And then they're also, the people who are against it are pushing further and further against it. There's no one can control the narrative anymore. So there's no strategy behind it. And it leads to some horrific outcomes. There were gatekeepers and trendsetters for a reason. And not that it was always good, but and now that we don't have them, the discourse is so pathetic and harmful, and that leads to a lot of what you were saying, because it's not like the Democratic Party was out there saying let's force everyone to be transgender, but there were people who were doing that. All you need is you need a teacher who wants more followers and posts them doing something with a child. And then you need a nut job reactionary like Libs of TikTok lady who posts that to get her own following. And then you have an ecosystem that does nothing but harm everyone. And that's what we have. And of course, the best outcome would be to be tolerant of transgenderism among children without in any way forcing it on anyone or encouraging it. Just
Yeah, well,
yeah.
if you ask me on my position on that, I would say that I don't have any issue with any kind of social transition or any of that. I do think there is an issue with medical transition stuff with children, but more in the especially with young girls. And this is coming from if you know anything about young prepubescent girls and pubescent girls, there's already a huge body self-image issue that's going to happen that comes along with puberty. And I'd hate for someone to feel not comfortable in their body because they're going through puberty and then something go the wrong direction there that's irreversible and there's no way to really go back from 100%. And so like that's kind of where a lot of it is for me. It's less talked about with boys, but it happens to boys too. And that's where a lot of my concern lies is, I think with trans stuff, it's going to be a lot like quote unquote retarded. We're going to move on, and we're going to be able to look at it and go, hey, well, there's autistic people, and then there's Asperger's, and then there's different things that's going on here. It's not all this same blanket thing. And some people, this is the right solution. Some people, this is the right solution. Some people, this is the right solution. Does that make any sense?
It does, but once this became this not just part of the culture war, but in many ways the center of the American or Western culture war. I don't know exactly how. That would be a very interesting book, but it's just become the absolute heart of everything in a way. That's never going to happen. There's never going to be rational policy about this. That's what happens. It's the whole thing has become a minefield. And to me, the most important thing in this issue is not to turn this into an excuse for out and out hatred of transgender people,
Yeah,
which is
yeah. I mean, I'm a
you don't.
hardcore body autonomy. I don't care if you wanna amputate a leg. It doesn't matter, like, that's always been my position. The only thing I've ever had any concern of is how do we protect kids? Once you're an adult, though, you can do whatever you want.
So that's the
And
problem. That's the problem with this discourse is that the protecting kids for so many of the people who feel strongly about it and are pushing certain policies with it, it turns into trying to destroy adults as well. Because
Right.
it doesn't for a lot of people on the other side, and it's very hard to, it's hard to say who's who and what's what. I don't want to impugn everyone. It doesn't come from concern for children. It comes from hatred for trans people. And in general, you, by the way, have an entire podcast about the rights of children. You're an outlier
Right.
here. There is most people in America or anywhere, honestly, don't give a fuck about children. They don't care about children starving. They don't care about children experiencing genocide. They don't care about anything. The only thing they care about is a child losing their swim competition to a transgender person? That seems to be the only issue related to children that they care about. That tells you a lot about that kind of person. They don't if you're not in general, if you're not more worried about children starving or experiencing war than you are about that, you're not really that worried about children. This is not a major problem for most children. How many children are getting irreversible gender assignment surgery? I don't know the number, but they're not high. And how many children are struggling to eat?
Right, that's why it's not a hard, long, it's not a go-to, subject on my podcast, but it's just generally like if we're asking what my position is on it, that's 100% where I'm at. It's 100% about concern for, like I said, especially prepubescent and pubescent kids, and even more especially girls, because this is why you see anorexia and bulimia so high in these populations as well, is because there's a lot of body image issues, and I'd hate for that to end up misinterpreted and, get sent down a hormone path or a surgery path, even worse. And then there's differences now in your body that you don't want to be there. And then you have another body dysmorphia issue, and I think that's not productive either. But when it comes to social transitioning, I honestly think that's not a bad idea. It's like if you're thinking that your issue is you think you're a girl and you're not really a boy, cool. We're gonna get you some clothes. We're gonna get you set up. We're gonna call you she. We're gonna let you live this for the next 2, 3 years and see how you feel and see if it's, quote unquote, just a phase,
Yeah,
you
so
know?
so I feel about this kind of the way I feel about patents, to recall the beginning of this conversation, where to me it's a question of finding a balance between things. This shouldn't be a religious an argument. When I say religious, I mean in the sense of you have absolute dogma of you have to protect and
Mhm.
encourage trans ideology in every way, or you have to prevent it in every way. Rather, and that's a lot what you're saying, and I don't really know enough to argue about the details with you, to allow a child to have their self-expression without causing them irreversible harm when they're not mature enough to make irreversible decisions. That's it. And that should be left to professionals who know more about it than I do. The fact that it's to me the most harmful thing is that it's become the cornerstone of the culture war. These are children, and these are private decisions, and very sensitive private decisions. And a bunch of racist morons should not be making those decisions. They have no skin in the game. They're doing this for their own political reasons and reasons of hatred. And that is the real problem. The real problem is people intervening too heavily in this for their political interests. The real problem is both the hardcore trans activists and the libs of TikTok people who've turned this into a hellscape for children when it's difficult enough to navigate this time of your life without having all this, and it ends up leading to persecution and to suicide, and just making a very, very difficult situation already worse for everyone.
Yeah. Like I said, I've had numerous friends of mine that were trans when I was in school even, and that was a while back. So, like for me, I've never had any issue with it or any problem with it. Like I've been hyper socially liberal pretty much my entire life. I identified as a conservative Republican as a nerdy middle school kid who cared about politics even in middle school. And like I said, what pushed me over the edge was literally gay marriage because I was literally like, why do you care? Who cares? And I've I was always in the camp of like radical libertarianism where I say, well, why is the government involved in marriage at all? But that's a tangent. Anyway, the point being is I really have always been a live and let live. Let people freely associate how they wish to associate, and let people, identify as they want to identify. If you want to change your name to Greg tomorrow, I'll call you Greg from now on.
Yeah,
I might call you Shaiel next Tuesday, and I'd like you to let it go, but you know what I mean.
yeah, I
I
have a
will
lot of
attempt to call you
sympathy.
Greg.
I have a lot of sympathy for libertarianism. This might surprise you. I used to even consider myself a light libertarian at one point because I agree with you about a lot of things. I don't see why the government needs to be involved in marriage, prostitution, drugs, a lot of other things. I do see where the government needs to be involved in distribution of resources, justice, infrastructure, those sorts of things. But I also
I
think
can
the
fix you.
yeah, you can fix me. I think the nation state, I think the state as it currently exists is not particularly useful. It was created in order to protect from threats in the Middle Ages, the Vikings and so on and so forth. If you look at the history of how state apparatuses were created, raiders, all those sorts of things. But I think we need to replace them with something that will provide a lot of those services. Now I have to go because I promised my wife
Anarchy.
I'd take her for brunch. But
Heck yeah, man. I really appreciate you sitting down and having this conversation. We had a
this
few
was fun.
disagreements, but I love how we were able to just really have the talk and show people how to be an adult.
Well,
Because
aside
like I said, we had a
from
few
when
disagreements, but we showed where we can agree. And I think that's kind of like that's something that you know, anyone can take from this. Teach it to your kids.
I
If you
have to
notice throughout the
say
conversation,
I
go
have to
ahead.
say,
Go ahead.
I've been involved in a lot of debates online, including on very confrontational formats like Pierce Morgan and a couple of others. And I've never gotten into a really heated argument with anyone even once. Maybe it's me, maybe it's not. Never. It's always been friendly, maybe a little bit testy occasionally, no insults. As you know, I've had some horrific fights with people on Twitter. Sometimes they were my fault too. But never in this format when it's face to face. I think it's very easy to have good face to face interactions. I talked to hardcore Zionists, and I've talked to people who are far to the left of me, and never had when you talk to people face to face, it's a little bit different, and that we need more of that. I do see people do it face to face too, especially on Pierce Morgan. Like you had Stephen Miller's wife trying to deport Senk over there. But
I'll call that.
generally speaking, it's a lot better. Yeah, especially we're friends. But
I think that if we can really have these conversations, that's the only way to get anywhere. And that's kind of what I was saying. Like if we're going to have a takeaway for what should you teach your kids, looking at this conversation, if you notice, there was a lot of disagreement between me and Chael, but there was also agreement, and both of us were conceding as we went, right? Shael was like, "Oh no, no, I actually completely agree with you, and not only do I agree with you, I'm going to reinforce your point." You know what I'm saying, and vice versa. And so this is something that whether or not you're intentionally doing it, but you guys in the world can intentionally do. If you intentionally add this to your discussions, what it's going to do is it's going to make that person want to listen to what you have to say more as well. because they're gonna tell, "Oh, this guy's actually hearing me out. Let me hear him out." There's something in our brain that kind of forces that. If you wanna break through cognitive dissonance with anyone, concede a couple points. They're right about something, concede something to them. A lot of times, it really will get them to listen.
Great point, Daniel. Great point.
It's like, well, it's like what I did with that one gentleman who was, "You didn't talk about Bill Clinton." It's like, "Actually, we did, and you know what? It is a really important part of this war."
He
You
was
should
right
watch
that
the whole
we
video.
didn't talk enough about that war, but that wasn't the topic either. It was the targeted assassinations that were invented after, notably invented after that by Israel, by the way. And I know the guy who invented the entire legal scheme of it, a fellow called Daniel Reisner. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But that didn't exist then. So it's a newer phenomenon. But yeah, you know, a dialogue. But what that guy's trying to do is he's trying to completely dismiss everything that we say based on some irrelevant point. That's what people try to do. That immediately shuts you up. Didn't shut you up because you know what you're doing. Yeah, I just ignored him.
Yeah. And like I said, it makes it like he didn't respond back. Like the point was like that kind of stuff, it shuts people off at the end. I know I might be new to Twitter, but I've been in the Facebook trenches for a while. So I've learned a few tricks about a lot of this stuff. That's one of the best ways to really like shut people down that are basically, for lack of a better word, intellectually trolling.
You know, those of us who've been in Twitter for a long time don't do that, and the reason we don't do that is because we've been burned. You try to have a good faith argument. You sometimes it goes on for like 2, 3 hours, and in the end, the person just tells you to go fuck yourself and blocks you or whatever, and personally insults you after you put in a lot of effort. It happens over and over again, and it's just a waste of time and of resources 90% of the time. And the bigger you are, the more, not that I'm huge, but you know, I have some followers. The bigger you are, the more people do that just to aggravate you. So conversation is intentionally killed. And that's why people like Mehdi Hassan and others who used to engage in a lot of conversations on Twitter don't even have comments on anymore because, you know, there's just no point. And you're right that that's how you want to have a conversation. But so many people don't want to have a conversation that it makes people who do want to have a conversation, like myself, not even engage. Sad but true.
Yeah. It's also something that I've told people before is something that you also have to remember. As annoying as the whole like I'm gonna talk back and forth with you and then block you is, what's kind of interesting that it seems like we get lost in the back and forth and forget that everybody else is watching. There is an audience. So even if they get to the end and they block you, people see that whole conversation. There's something to remembering the audience and kind of setting that example. I don't know if we're seeking to be, like I said, leaders of an anti-war movement, right? Then there's an example that needs to be set and I don't know, a presence that has to be had, if that makes sense.
It does.
We have to represent peace and more than just, our arguments.
Excellent point. That's a very good place to stop. Represent peace and not just make our arguments. I'm trying to do that. You help me sometimes. You tell me, listen, you need to calm down.
Hey, the only reason I tell you that is because I am a very rageful soul myself.
I've never seen that side of you, but I believe you.
But I will tell you, these pacifist ideologies are very helpful. The non-aggression principle and a lot of these kind of course, finds more Christian theology. Well, that stuff is very, very helpful to calming the hell down. Um,
Nothing helps me more than meditating every day. I've meditated every day now for 59 days straight, longest I ever have, I think, and boy, does it do wonders. Yeah,
like I said, it'll change your life. Just a good bit of self-reflection and reflecting on the world, it really will.
absolutely.
But
All
yeah,
right, my
we'll
friend.
end there, man. I appreciate you. Tell your wife I said I'm sorry for stealing you away. Tell her
She's
to
not used to me
arrest you.
even she's not used to me even being up this early. She's just pleasantly surprised that I'm awake.
Do you hear what I said?
Sorry, what was
I
the last
said
thing you
tell her
said?
to arrest you.
Oh, yes, yes, the picture.
Uh,
I you know, I wouldn't resist. I wouldn't resist. You
No
look good in that
resisting.
costume. Yeah. Alright, buddy. See
Alright,
you
dog.
later.
Catch you later.